The Utah Jazz have an all-star, a player who was an all-star at least 2 years ago. The last 2 years have not gone very well for Lauri Markkanen. Lauri Markkanen is a hell of a talent. He's a player that I've talked to trainers about, scouts about, and this is prior to the Brandon Ingram trade. How might this type of player fit next to a Scottie Barnes? And the consensus among everyone I've ever talked to was this is the dream fit next to a Scottie Barnes. Today, I want to talk about what a trade like this would look like, why the Utah Jazz would be compelled to move off of Lauri Markkanen, what it would take for the Raptors, what is the logic, what is the value of a three-point shooter like this being on this team? How good is he really? How well does he age? How does he fit into the basically, how does he fit into the trajectory of what the Raptors are trying to build? Why is he a perfect fit for Darko Rajakovic's system in Toronto? What value does he bring beyond the shot creation and shooting value that he brings as a catch and shoot movement shooter at 7 feet tall? What are his weaknesses? Defensively, certainly there are a lot of weaknesses. And how might he fit with a Scottie Barnes and a Brandon Ingram? Might your defense be completely obliterated if you go with that? We've always heard you got to play a shot blocker with Lauri Markkanen. The Raptors don't exactly have a dominant rim protector. So how do you fit, Lauri next to Jakob Poeltl? Does this move Scottie to the two? There's a lot of considerations, but I'll start this conversation out with a simple a simple theory on basketball. There is a growing misconception that 3-point shots are more important than 2-point shots in the NBA. Give me a W if you believe this to be true. Now, obviously, this is partially true because, E-Trix, Lauri for Scottie is a heartbeat or in a heartbeat. You're crazy. Not trading Scottie Barnes for Lauri Markkanen. You're trying to trade for Lauri Markkanen so you can pair him with Scottie Barnes. So Araf believes this. Terrence Davis believes this. Okay, let me tell you why that's wrong. Okay, so I was listening to a podcast from, I want to say 2 years ago, where Mike D'Antoni was on Thinking Basketball. And it just so happened that I had already planned out this live and I was doing laundry about 40 minutes ago, right after I got off of playback. And they mentioned, he said, like every single team you've gone to has shot 10 more threes. Why is that? And he immediately went to the exact same point that I was making on X last night, which was the point of a three-pointer is to create better two-pointers. The threat of a three-pointer is to create better two-pointers. So let's start by talking about the court, the geometry of the court. I touched on a little bit of this in yesterday's live, and I think this will tie in beautifully to why Lauri Markkanen works so well in Toronto and why I was such a big proponent for guys like Cam Johnson in Toronto, why I have felt, despite, some concerns about durability and all that stuff, that Zach LaVine would be a good player in Toronto, why I was so upset that we got off of Norman Powell, why OG Anunoby is so good for Scottie Barnes. The court is 94 feet, but really the threat of scoring starts at about 28, 29, 30 feet, unless you're Steph Curry, in which case, Steph Curry, Damian Lillard, they pull from 32 feet. That's still a decent shot for them. But for most players, the threat of scoring is from 27 feet and in, which creates a rectangle, right? Now, this rectangle is interesting for the fact that on all four sides of this rectangle is basically a boundary. On the left and right is the two sidelines. On the back end is a baseline. There's a 3-point, arc around. And then beyond, at least, is the backcourt, right? You're not being guarded. If you start an offensive possession at 27 feet and you start dribbling backwards, that's not pressuring the defense. That's relieving the defense. So the question then becomes, what about teams like Boston that just play hot potato and throw the basketball around and, shoot a bunch of threes, and they're, even on transition, they're trying to shoot threes. Well, I think this comes back to a misunderstanding of mathematics. The math says average offense is going up every single year. It's an arms race. You're not going to win games where you score 98 points and the other team scores 108, regardless of how you feel about it philosophically, or, oh my God, my eyes hurt, I don't want to watch teams shooting so many threes. 3-pointers are very important, but they're not the point. You don't put 3-point shooters on the court so they can shoot threes. You put 3-point shooters on the court to do one critical thing, which is to vacate the most important zones on the basketball court. What are those zones? If we break it down to a priority, the most important zone on a basketball court is 3 feet from the basket. That little circle around the basket is the most important, efficient zone. Every single offensive possession from transition to half court to isolation to pick and roll is designed to put a player with the basketball 2 feet from the basket. Go back and watch the 90s, go back and watch the 80s. This place is very congested. Typically, there's a big camping out, demanding the basketball. There's usually another big about 8 feet away. That puts two defenders very, very close. So the best players used to be centers. The best players were the players who were dominant in this zone. Then we get to Michael Jordan, Dr. J, Magic Johnson, whatever. We get a different evolution. And while it's not three-pointers that become more important, it's the mid-range, because the mid-range expands the area around the basket. It's not that Michael Jordan is more efficient shooting from 20 feet than he is shooting from 2 feet. It's that his ability to shoot from 20 feet vacates the space for other players to score efficient baskets. Now, league average offense is 114. That's the last 2 years. Last year was like 113. Year before was 115. Split the difference. It's 114. That's where we're heading. Now, if they allow physicality to come back, maybe league offense goes to like 112 next year. With all the injuries we've had, the steep competition in the West, I can expect if they allow teams to be more physical, it'll probably be around 112. But let's use 114 as a mark. 114 means what? 114 offensive rating means 114 points per 100 possessions, which means also 1.14 points per possession. Now, this 1.14 is an aggregate total of all the possessions in a 100 possession game. And, teams, regularly hit 100, 105 possessions now. So this is totally normal. It's not like back in, the 90s where it was consistently, 85, 90 possessions, 75 possession games where, things are very grinded out. No, we're moving faster. But there's also a reason we move faster. We're moving faster because the earlier you attack, the more likely it is that you get an opening at the paint. The more shooters you have, the more likely it is that you open up the space for a driving lane to attack the paint. Everything goes back to the paint. It's interesting, however, that when we discuss players like Josh Giddey, Scottie Barnes, Jason Kidd, players like this early in his career, Lonzo Ball, when we talk about these players, we almost always define them by their inability to shoot threes. Does it matter that a player can't shoot threes? Sure, it does, but only because it limits their ability to open up the paint for other players. Now, we were just on playback and we were watching this beautiful game. Well, not really that beautiful. It was a blowout between the Dallas Wings and the Las Vegas Aces. And what happened was interesting. From the right block, A'ja Wilson cuts towards the basket. In so doing, she takes the corner defender with her. What this opens up is a weak side driver opening up for a cross-court pass to the three-point shooter that's now wide open. A'ja Wilson just created a three-point shot without ever touching the basketball. The threat of A'ja alone created an open three for her teammates. That's what talented players do. That's what stars do. That's what players who are high on scouting reports do. Devin Booker doesn't have to take a single shot to help his teammates. Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Brandon Ingram, you can go down the list. If you've ever averaged 20 to 25 points per game in this league and you're relatively close to where you were when you did that, you're a threat. You're a threat. Now, because you're a threat, you're creating openings for other players. Ideally, you're so much of a threat that occasionally you draw a double team. And ideally, when you draw that double team, you're able to pass out of that double team. Now, if who you pass to out of that double team, because you've done your job, once you're an offensive player, you've drawn a double team in the mid post, you've done your job. But if the only person you can pass to in the corner is Ben Simmons on one corner and Bam Adebayo on the other corner, you're going to have a really bad offense. And I think that's sort of where the Raptors find themselves right now. All this development, all the good habits, all the shot quality index and all that stuff. But the problem is efficiency. You just have guys who don't hit shots. There's a multitude of reasons why the Raptors don't hit shots and also have really efficient offensive habits. One of those reasons is they're just not that good. They're just not that talented. Their shooters just aren't that great. Beyond Emmanuel Quickley, and I think you can now put Brandon Ingram on that list, Gradey Dick has been somewhat of an average shooter, I would say. If league average efficiency is 36% from three, then Gradey Dick, despite the complexity of his shots, which I think is valuable for the same reason that Lauri Markkanen is valuable, he is an average to above average shooter, but he's not a great shooter. Ochai Baji was a great shooter from the perspective of he shot north of 40% from three. Jamison Battle, same thing. You do have some pieces here. The problem is none of them are so good that they move the defense or bend the defense the way a Lauri Markkanen can, or even a way Cam Johnson can. Maybe they're just not old enough yet. Maybe we have to see this thing through. Maybe you don't need a Lauri Markkanen. Maybe Jamison Battle plus Ochai Baji plus Gradey Dick plus Emmanuel Quickley plus Brandon Ingram provides the type of space that Scottie Barnes and RJ Barrett need to navigate. Maybe. But the size of a shooter, the finishing ability of a shooter, the ability to put the ball in the court and score in the mid-range on a pull-up jump shot. This is what makes players like Brandon Ingram so hard to stop. This is what made Kobe Bryant so hard to stop. It's not just that they can shoot threes like Ochai Agbaji or PJ Tucker or Nicholas Batum. It's the fact that once you try to take one thing away, you open up the floodgates for the next thing. And then when you take that next thing away, they have a counter to that. When you have a three-level scorer like a Brandon Ingram, who can quite efficiently score on all three levels, that is a cheat code for the offense and a nightmare for the defense, because where do you push him? Brandon Ingram catches the ball at the top of the key. Okay, no, let's say he catches the ball above the break, right? Let's say the defense isn't set. Who's overreacting to that? Everybody, because he shoots 40% on catch and shoot. So you can't let him get that shot. You want to put him in a position where he has to get to put the ball on the floor. But because he's a good ball handler, right? Now we have the second counter, which is he can put you on his hip. And now because he's a good mid-range shooter, he can also take one shoulder and put, a mid-range shot on you. And he's really good at that. So now you have the third counter. And if you don't react properly to that and you don't close up the paint, because now what are we really doing here? You have one defender on your hip. He's been beat. Then you have a second defender reaching in from the wing who's trying to deter the drive. You have a big who is now facing potentially a 2-on-1 at the basket and is having to angle himself away from his man to stop Brandon Ingram. One player basically just warped the defense by getting right into the middle. And because he is a good passer from that situation, he is a cheat code. But if the only person he can pass to in this situation is Jamal Shed on one corner and Jonathan Mobile on the other corner, your offense will not generate enough. Your offense simply will not generate enough. The key to spacing is not just having players like Brandon Ingram, who are great, by the way, for spacing. No one will ever convince me in a million years that Brandon Ingram will be bad for spacing. Brandon Ingram is basically a spacing cheat code. He can be even more so. If he buys into what Darko wants him to do right now, he'll be even better at this. Brandon Ingram, in my opinion, is a more talented player than Lauri Markkanen. It's just he's a different type of player than Lauri Markkanen. Lauri is more of a catch and shoot guy. Lauri is more of a you create for me and I score 20 points anyway type of guy. Ingram is more of a I create for you type of guy. It will be interesting to see what Brandon Ingram looks like with more shots created for him, because I think that can make him much more efficient. It'll be interesting to see what Brandon Ingram looks like more as a burn cutter and, a screener and, catching lob passes and, just running the floor in transition and trying to get easier baskets. I don't think he's had easy baskets for the last 4 or 5 years. It'll be very interesting to see what a talented player like this does with easier baskets. But the same things that I'm saying about Brandon Ingram, to some extent, I can say about Lauri Markkanen. So what happens when a Scottie Barnes becomes better? Let's assume that Scottie becomes as good as I think he's going to become. And, I'll mention this because I mentioned this on X. Do y'all realize that through 4 years, Kawhi Leonard was averaging 12 points per game? Do y'all realize that? I feel like when I talk to people about Kawhi Leonard, they think that he was born like a 30-point per game scorer. 12 points per game through 4 years. Through 6 years, it was 16 points per game. You know who averages 17 points per game on their career? Scottie Barnes. So, it's not that absurd, but people will say, well, Rob, come on. Scottie shoots 31% from three. At the same point in his career, Kawhi was shooting like 38% from three. Well, here's something worth noting. In year 4, Kawhi Leonard was assisted on 97% of his three-point attempts. Sorry, three-point makes. 97%. Last year, Scottie was assisted on like 73% of his three-point attempts. Or is it 77%? I think it was 77%. That's a major gap in self-creation. The gap between Scottie and Kawhi isn't necessarily only that one is a better shooter. No argument here. Kawhi's a better shooter. It's not that one's a better defender. Yeah, sure. Kawhi's a better defender for sure. By year 5, Kawhi was the best defender in the league. The real gap here is that Scottie's a way better playmaker too. And he's bigger. He's bigger. He's a better shot blocker. He is more positionally versatile, in my opinion, even if I will 100% agree that Kawhi is the better perimeter defender. Barnes is no defensive slouch himself, and I think he could easily move into the conversation of top 10 defender next year. It's just unfortunate that we sort of discount players who are on losing teams. Just had this debate with Ox today where I was saying I think Paige Becker's a top 20 player in the WNBA, but boom, but she's on a 9-win team. That's always the argument. I tell you that Scottie Barnes is a top 20 player in the NBA. You say, but the Raptors won 30 games. How can he be so good? But that's the thing, right? Trying to dissect individual contributions from a 5-on-5 game is very different. It's very difficult, actually. You could have a great player. I've watched a lot of really good high school players play on, mediocre teams, only to watch them go down to a prep program or whatever down to states and be a completely different type of player, right? Whether you're a big or a guard, having other players who are good, especially if you're a smart player, is going to help you a lot, right? So imagine a Scottie Barnes with a more refined handle, which is, the progression that I see from him, and, a more deadly mid-range shot, which is also a progression I see from him, more efficient catch and shoot player, which I also see from him, more physically strong, dominant, finishing around the basket, maybe, gets back to more cuts, more screens, more offensive rebounds as well, but just the ability to create is elevated, is getting better. Now, last year, very often, getting into the tooth or getting into the middle of the paint, which Scottie could do with some regularity, one, two dribbles. Sometimes he'll back down his defender. Sometimes, he'll just seal, getting the ball in a place where you can score, basically, get to your spots. And when you break down the tape, very often what will happen is nothing happens. Not enough is happening. Or if something does happen, the defense has too easy a decision. They can just cheat off a non-shooter. They can just cheat off a guy who's not good at finishing to the basket. Maybe they can just ignore Davion Mitchell. How many games did we watch last year when we were doing the post-game breakdowns where I would show you that there was not a defender within 15 feet of Davion Mitchell because they knew damn well that the offense was never going to result in him taking a shot, and if they did, so be it. Well, right now, Jamal Shead is in the exact same situation, and he's your backup point guard. Jonathan Mobo is in the same position. Jakob Poeltl, while a way better finisher than those players, is in a similar situation. Colin Murray-Boyles is in a similar situation. You've got a lot of non-shooters, and frankly, you don't have enough shooting to compensate for all of them, because I've always believed that you can play with one smart non-shooter, but the minute you start to play with two, you're playing with fire. So it's not easy to make a trade for Lauri Markkanen. Let me try to explain why I think. Okay, wait. I want to just finish up the thought on the mid-range shot. Now, the earlier point about 114 offensive rating suggests that some people who I think are very misguided will look at that number and say, well, that means that every single player and every single play type that generates less than 1.14 points per possession is inefficient offense, which I thoroughly disagree with. So you say, well, corner three for this guy, he shoots 36%. That's more than 1.14. Corner three for this guy, and he shoots 30%. Well, that's not more than 1.14. So 30% shooter can't shoot, doesn't shoot. 36% three-point shooter has the green light. But that's not really fair. That's not really fair. That's not really fair at all. What about Fred VanVleet? Fred VanVleet is a very positive shooter, but very often shoots 35% from three. Devin Booker is a positive shooter. He very often shoots 35% from three. 35% is certainly not 30%. I get it. But consider that the number 1.14 is an average. It's an average of all outcomes. So I want you to imagine a dominant mid-range scorer that scores 1.06 points per possession, which by mid-range shot standards is very good. 1.06. Okay. 1.06 for the mathematically inclined means you shoot 53% on mid-range shots. That's 1.06. Now, is that more efficient than a Derek White 3? No. But why do I want Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who shoots 54% on threes, which is 1.08? Why do I want him shooting so many of those shots? Why do I want him to gun for that shot over and over and over? Well, because of this. If I set up 30 possessions where the goal is to get Shai, or the outcome I'm willing to live with is Shai takes a mid-range shot. If I set up 30 possessions that way, what's actually going to happen? 5 of those 30 possessions, he's going to get a shot up at really dominant efficiency, 1.08. 5 possessions, he's going to probably go to the line and get fouled because he's really good at that. Now, that 1.08 becomes more like 1.9, 1.885, whatever he shoots from the line. He's a great free throw shooter. So we're already balancing it out, and we're already at very high efficiency offense with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. 5 of those possessions are going to result in a dead ball, either a non-shooting foul or a turnover or something like that. So we'll just scrap those away. Maybe 5 of those possessions are going to result in a restart of the offense, in which case, the defense recovers and, the shot is not taken, but the defense has been bent enough sufficiently that I can restart it better somewhere else. 5 of those possessions are going to result in a corner 3 because the defense overreacts to Shai beating his man. There's a threat to go to the basket. Maybe 5 of those possessions are going to result in him not taking a mid-range shot, rejecting the mid-range, reading the court that the big has vacated the spot or is too late to recover, and beating your man in that pick and roll situation is going to result in Shai rejecting the mid-range shot and taking instead the layup or the dunk. And maybe 5 of those possessions are going to result in a corner 3. When you sum total all those 30 plays where you drew up a play with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander getting to the middle of the court, open to him taking a shot, if it's open, what you really do is you generate offense at like a clip of like 138 or 136, 132, something crazy like that. Like Shai is incredible. So that's the point. That's what Brandon Ingram does in the middle of the court. Not quite to the level of Shai, not quite to the level of Jokic and Luka and Embiid, but some variation of that. That's the theory of it. That's the theory of why you should not be down on mid-range shots. Because sometimes those inefficient, quote unquote, inefficient mid-range shots that maybe y'all think Scottie's a bum because, he's shooting 47, 48% on the short mid-range. And you're like, well, that's not even equivalent to an Ochai 3. That's not even equivalent to a Gradey 3. Why is he taking these dumbass shots? Well, those dumbass shots are very important because if he can become a little bit more efficient at it, he already went from 27% to 47%. So who knows where this is going. But if he can get up to like 50%, honestly, 47% is great. He's already great. If he can take it one step up and go to 50%, now what happens is instead of one defender, you take on 2 defenders. Because if you're that good in the mid-range, like Kevin Durant, if you're Kevin Durant, DeMar DeRozan, now you're sucking the best defender on the other team. Scottie Barnes and Brandon Ingram are not being guarded by weak defenders. Typically, I watch these games back, teams are usually sticking their best defender on this guy. That immediately is easing the court for everybody else. That's the whole point, is you're supposed to make your teammates better. Now, I want to, briefly, before I touch on Lauri Markkanen, talk about players that maybe you at home overrate. And I will give you two. One is Luka Doncic. The other is James Harden. I don't think it's crazy to say that if I ever tried to make a case that Scottie Barnes is better than either one of those players in their prime, that I would be laughed out of the gym, laughed out of every single conversation. And I'm not going to try to make that case because I think Scottie has a long way to go before he's better than those guys. But I want to point to why those guys are not as good as Steph Curry and Michael Jordan, Nikola Jokic, the true greats. It's interesting. They're both helio hubs in the same vein as, someone like Cade Cunningham. Paolo Banchero is a little bit like this too. The ball dominant guy, right? But it's interesting that if you look at the analytics on the on-offs, you'll see that when he was with the Dallas Mavericks, Luka's teams were often almost as good with him on the court as they were with him off the court. And this isn't really the trend that holds true for real superstars. There's no way in hell that LeBron's teams were better with him off the court. There's no way Michael Jordan's teams, Allen Iverson's teams, Vince Carter's teams, most greats who've ever finished top 10 in MVP voting make their teams better when they're on the court. An example would be the Philadelphia 76ers, I think in 2000 with Allen Iverson. They were 4 points per, they were winning games by 4 points per possession, but with Iverson on the court, it became 9 points. This is not a hard and fast rule. There's a lot of things that impact this. Maybe the bench is really weak or whatever. But typically, your starters, if you have a true superstar, you should see that impact somewhere in the plus minus data. But why is it that Luka and Harden so consistently don't impact their teams this way? Two very critical reasons. Number one, both of them are stagnant off ball. They're ball dominant on the ball. They suck up a lot of possessions. They use their teammates. They try to create easy shots for their teammates. But when they don't have the basketball, they don't do a hell of a lot. Luka is a lazy cutter, unwilling. He is not a great screener. He can do it. He just doesn't do it. So very often what you'll see with Luka, and because Luka especially, more so than Harden, is not a dominant shooter. Like he's a good enough shooter that he'll command a double, but he's a good enough shooter that he can command, a soft double at 22 feet, but he's not the type of shooter where you'll be running to deny him the basketball at 26 feet. You're not doing that. So with Luka, when he doesn't have the basketball, very often he's just kind of camping out. He's not doing anything. He's not cutting. He's not screening. He's not moving away. Compare that to someone like a Sean Marion, Andre Karolinko, Josh Hart, like these types of players, even a Scottie Barnes, Draymond Green, Franz Wagner. These players are hyperactive when they don't have the basketball. So their off-ball value is great. Their on-ball value is nowhere close to Luka's. But one could argue James Harden and Luka Doncic would be better players if they moved off the ball a little bit more often and actually helped their teammates that way. But the only way these two players and players of this mold help their team or think they can help their team is by having the basketball in their hands. This ball dominance is not necessarily correlated to winning, as evidenced by the fact that neither of these players have a championship. And I don't think that's going to change. There's a reason why Giannis, Jokic, guys like this have championships, because when Jokic doesn't have the basketball, he's very valuable. The other reason that I think the on-off data suggests that their teams are not that much worse with them on the bench is because they're bad defenders. Harden has had moments where he's been okay defender, but he's also been like a terrible defender, lazy, downright lazy, uncommunicative, unwilling to close out, very low motor. So put all of this together, and you can understand that as much value as they bring, they also zap value away. So compare that to a player like a Scottie Barnes, who has nowhere near the ball skills, shooting, scoring, volume, etc. that these two do. He's not nearly the passer Luka is, although I'd argue he's a very good passer. So most people would say James and, of course, we can all agree. We're not being idiots here. James Harden and Luka Doncic are better playmakers, better ball handlers, better scorers, better shooters than Scottie Barnes. But Barnes gives you value exactly where those two players don't. And he doesn't hurt you where those players help you either. Scottie is like vanilla ice cream in so many ways. He's top 2 in blocks in his draft class. He's top 2 in steals, but he's not number 1. He's top 3 in scoring, but he's not number 1. He's top 4 in rebounds, but he's not number 1. He's top 3 in assists, but he's not number 1. You see my point? He kind of does everything so well. But where the problem occurs is that he doesn't do anything exceptionally well to the point of noteworthy praise. I could argue his defensive versatility is his greatest skill right now. Maybe his playmaking is in the 90th percentile. There's plenty of things he does at the 90th percentile, but there's nothing that Scottie Barnes does in the 99th percentile. Not one thing. Not one thing in the 99th percentile. And when you look at MVP candidates, Jokic, even Luka, Joel Embiid, Giannis, there's multiple things they do in the 99th percentile. Multiple. So it's Scottie, you're trying to describe a player, and you almost end up describing like a great role player. And I think that's the confusion. There aren't a lot of holes. You know, you can argue the three-point shooting is weakness. Well, I would argue point to 2 players on losing teams who had harder threes last year than Scottie. Some of the hardest threes in the NBA. Just really unnatural for him. But look at where the three-point progression has come from. And this is a guy who was shooting over 40% on catch and shoot threes 2 years ago when he became an all-star. Over 40% is the same stat as Brandon Ingram. At what point, 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months, did you ever think that Scottie Barnes would be shooting the ball as well as Harden and Ingram? Like, those are good shooters. He's shooting the ball as well as those 3 guys when his shot diet was corner catch and shoots. 91% of Scottie Barnes' three-point attempts 2 years ago when he became an all-star, and even more so before the trade of Pascal, were assisted threes. You want to know something funny? 100% of Lauri Markkanen's threes last year were assisted. 100%. I think it was 99 to 100%. It was like, I think he maybe made 1 or 2 that weren't assisted. Those are easier threes. Assisted threes are easier threes. In my humble opinion, they are easier. Self-generating threes are the hardest threes. Pull-up threes are the hardest threes. The Tyrese Maxey threes, the Damian Lillard threes, these are the hard ones. Steph Curry threes, these are the hard ones. Really hard. Off movement, off the dribble threes, hardest. Easiest threes, corner catch and shoot. So where do you put your best shooter? In the middle of the court to anchor your offense from above the break. That's not Scottie Barnes, but that's where he found himself. The difference between Scottie and Kawhi Leonard offensively, honestly, apart from the efficiency that has benefited, once again, when Scottie, for the first 3 months of Darko's career, when he was put into a role that was similar to the role, granted much greater than the role, but similar to the role that Kawhi Leonard had through his first 4 years in San Antonio, which is to say, create a little bit, sure, get to the basket, sure, set some screens, sure, cut, sure, but your threes are going to be generated for you. He was efficient. It's last year, but worth noting. 2 years ago, when he became an all-star, he was a terrible pull-up shooter. How can you bend the defense as a first option if you can't be a pull-up threat? You can't. Simply put, you can't. How can you be an offensive engine who gets to the middle of the floor and dissects the defense if you can't shoot from mid-range? Scottie was not a great mid-range shooter 2 years ago. I think there have been spurts and moments where he's been okay. In his rookie season, he was really good from long mid-range, which gave people a lot of, hope that he could progress as a three-point shooter. But I think last year, the mid-range progression we saw from him, despite claims that Scottie Barnes didn't get better, I think this mid-range shot is dynamite. I think it's huge. I think the pull-up progression is big. And so as these things progress with him, all those other things where I mentioned with Luka and Harden, where they cost you off the ball and they cost you defensively, well, Scottie's already fixed that. And unlike Kawhi and KD, where there's always a question of limited vision, where, okay, Kevin Durant's a great scorer, but what happens when you double Kevin Durant? Turnovers, missed passes. KD was my favorite player from 2007 to 2020. Nobody is going to tell me they've watched more Kevin Durant games in Raptorland than me. I love this dude. Not a great passer, man. Very weak in this regard. Not so weak that he's the worst passer in the league, but he's not a great passer. There's a reason why his best years and most success came with other great passers because it's not something that he himself can do very well. But I don't hear people talking about that very often. Nikola Jokic is the best player in the world. I don't hear enough people talking about conditioning, defense, rim protection. Maybe these are problems. The truth is, when you win basketball games, people only focus on your strengths. When you lose basketball games, people only focus on your weaknesses. And this is where Scottie is right now. He's a fantastic player. So much so, I was mentioning earlier that Kawhi Leonard, through 4 years, averaged 12 points per game. Do you know that Kawhi Leonard, through 6 years, averaged 16 points per game? I mentioned this point before, but I'll mention that again. How would you view Kawhi if he wasn't playing with Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and LaMarcus Aldridge and all these other players? What player has Scottie played with consistently in his, last 2 years that mirrors those level of players? Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, like it's easier to play off those guys, especially if you're a smart player. So I think that Brandon Ingram is a massive step in the right direction. This is exactly the type of player you want to put next to a Scottie Barnes. A player who can create their own shot, but is also dynamic off the ball. A player who can catch and shoot and be a release valve for Scottie, but also a player who can also maybe work a little bit in the mid-range to create openings for Scottie at the rim, where Scottie is very good. And by the way, Ingram at the rim is even better than Scottie. He's such a good finisher at the rim that the two-man game between these two players can be great. But what do you need to truly unlock these two players, in my humble opinion, is Lauri Markkanen, the stretch big. So now we get to the point. Lauri Markkanen. What does Lauri Markkanen bring to the Toronto Raptors? So Lauri was an all-star 2 years ago, as some of you may remember. You'll be forgiven if you haven't watched a lot of the Lauri Markkanen games. Those Utah Jazz teams have been god-awful. He has played fewer and fewer games over the last couple of years. His role was adjusted according to him and also Will Hardy last year, where they kind of forced him away from some of the shots that he was getting. If you look at his all-star season, right, 93% of his three-pointers were assisted. That is the absolute lowest mark of his career. And that's the year, by the way, that he became an all-star. That's the year that he averaged 25 points per game. So giving him the basketball has actually been pretty good for him. Letting him create a little bit has been good for him overall. He is also a master of the mid-range that year, 53%. Now, that is a mega outlier. 10 to 16 feet, that season is such a mega outlier that you would be forgiven for thinking that might not be reality. That 39% is at least viable. He shot, 40% from three in Chicago. He shot 39% from three the year he became an all-star. He shot 40% from three. That's at least viable. But the mid-range efficiency from 10 to 16 feet was only there for 1 year. If you're the Raptors trading for this guy, you definitely have to hope that that most improved season was not a fluke and that he can still do that. I think the shots he took last year off movement were very different than the shots that he's previously taken, which were more off of catch and shoot. Now, movement shooters, I believe, bend the defense twice as much as catch and shoot shooters. An example of a movement shooter that you will recognize is Gradey Dick. An example of a catch and shoot shooter that you probably should recognize is Ochai. Now, Ochai shoots more from three, better from three than Gradey. You might even think that Ochai is a better shooter than Gradey, but he's not. He's not even close to a better shooter than Gradey. Grady's shot difficulty is harder. Grady's value away from the basketball is harder. And the fact that he is such a respected shooter allows him to bend the defense when he doesn't have the basketball. He runs around, runs around a whole bunch of screens, catches, pops up above the break, shoots, shoots the gap, cuts to the basket. Grady's process is so underrated. I think there's a lot of Raptor fans who are very, very low on Gradey Dick who don't really understand the value of a Gradey Dick. Gradey is hella valuable. Unfortunately, he's probably going to go out in a trade for, Lauri Markkanen. So I hope that Danny Ainge agrees that he's very valuable. But this will be an evaluation because if Gradey really does pop this year, and I think third year is when many players have popped in the past. Scottie Barnes popped in his third year. If Gradey can pop in a significant way, I think you got to hold on to him because this is exactly the type of valuable, movement shooter you need around Scottie Barnes. Emmanuel Quickley is another example of a movement shooter. Maybe he doesn't do enough of the movement shooting shit, but this is a player who can, cut through the paint, pop up on the other side, and all of that movement, his defender has to follow him. His defender has to trail him. They have to call out switches. This is constantly, quote unquote, bending the defense because it is forcing the defense to make decisions. Now, what is the golden rule of thumb? If I'm coaching a basketball team, my rule of thumb, regardless of, I walk into the gym, I don't know anything about my team. I don't know who's a good shooter. I don't know who's a good paint player. I don't know who's a good passer. My only goal of my offense is to make sure that on every 24-second possession that I am forcing the defense to make at least 10 to 12 decisions. That's a minimum. 10 to 12 decisions is a minimum. Now, throwing the basketball down into the post forces 1 or 2 decisions. Kicking it out to the 3 forces another decision. These are simple decisions. What about complicated decisions? Because not all decisions are made equal, right? How do you guard a Scottie Barnes, Brandon Ingram pick and roll when you don't have great defenders or great rim protectors? It's not an easy equation to figure out. That's a complicated decision, right? That's a complicated decision. So looking at Lauri, I think Lauri Markkanen last year, you can point to, okay, well, the 3-point shooting really, really fell off a cliff. You are correct. He shot worse from 3 than he shot in a long time. So the numbers here say that he shot 31% from 3. Was it 31 or 32% from 3? Hold on. Pull this up. So per 100, he shot 35% from 3 last year. So 35%, 34.6. That's down from 39.9 the year before, 39.1 the year before. His 1 year in Cleveland, where he was more like playing small forward, that was 35.6. So still around league average. The year before that, his final year in Chicago, where he was injured a lot, but he shot 40% from 3. This is a guy who has proven track record as a shooter, and he is respected as a shooter. Believe me, teams are not leaving this guy. So putting him on the court with Brandon Ingram and Scottie Barnes makes him very dangerous, because trying to guard Scottie or Lauri with your third best defender is a recipe to get destroyed. Okay, now 8.2 win shares is a lot of win shares that he added in his All-Star season. 64% true shooting is mega insane. How did he do it? 50%. 50%. So on twos, he shot 58% that year that he became an All-Star. And while shooting 40% from 3. While shooting, by the way, 87, 88% from the free throw line. This is mega efficiency. They talk about the 50, 40, 90 club. He was pretty much right there. He was percentiles away from it. But unlike the Jose Calderones of the world who joined the 50, 40, 90 club, he did it as his team's first option. He did it while averaging 35.5 points per 100 possessions with not a lot of great talent around him. This is hard to do. And he did it in the stronger conference. Now, here's the breakdown of Lauri last year. You are correct to assume that he is a liability defensively. He's not a good defender. He doesn't have a lot of pop at the rim. He's not the greatest shot blocker. He's not the greatest rebounder. He's capable, but he's not great. He's pretty versatile. I mean, give him that. He's not very active. He's not very high motor. He's not a big time shot blocker. He's not great on switches. He's not going to be able to stay at the level or, pick up guards, or, if he gets cross matched on a guard on the perimeter, you're probably going to have to help him at some point. I mean, he's big enough that he can back off a little bit, but if that guard can shoot like a Jalen Brunson, you're dead. So yeah, there are some issues here. For sure, there are some issues. But look at this data here. And what does this tell you? This tells you that 2 years ago, he spent 44% of his time at center. Now, my eye test tells me that's probably too high, but he has played center before. He has played center minutes before. And if you can put a decently large shot blocking power forward next to him, I think he can do that. That player might be Colin Murray-Boyles. I'm not saying Colin Murray-Boyles is a great shot blocker, but he's a good enough defender that he can probably pair with Lauri Markkanen seamlessly. In fact, the pick and roll with those two players would feed families. So I love his synergy with Colin Murray-Boyles. I love his synergy with Scottie Barnes. I love his synergy with all these players. The problem right now is Why do the Raptors want to trade? Well, hang on, let me just show you some stuff here. In terms of shot quality, 94th percentile, he is just very efficient. He's not only great at making shots, even in a down year, he was 68th percentile in terms of true shooting. He's working with absolutely nothing. There's very little talent around him. Keontae George is overrated. Uh, Isaiah Collier is overrated. Kyle Filipowski might be their future four. Walker Kessler very often just gets in the way. There's just not a lot of talent over on those Utah teams, yo. So the fact that they are even able to win 1 or 2 games is a credit to him. They are a depleted team. They're just not that great. They have some talent, sure, Jordan Clarkson, whatever. They have some talent, but man, their talent is very young, and they just got even younger by drafting Ace Bailey, who might actually be their future four. So when I look at all of this, he's off their timeline. He's off their timeline. You look at how he scores, a lot of transition, a lot of spot up, a lot of off screens, a lot of handoffs, a lot of roll man, a lot of cuts. Not a lot of post ups, not a lot of ISOs, not a lot of pick and roll ball handlings. Perfect. Perfect. This player is designed for Darko Rakovic's system. So I want to talk about why they want to trade him, why I know they want to trade him. One big reason they want to trade him is he's not on their timeline. He's not on their timeline. He makes a lot of money and he's not on their timeline. They're not a good team. They're in the Western Conference. Okay. They're not competing in the Western Conference for the next 4 years. And he is 28 years old. So he's not getting younger. So by the time you're ready to compete, if one of these draft picks hits for you, if Isaiah Collier becomes something, Filipowski becomes something, you get something valuable, maybe Ace Bailey emerges, I wouldn't hold my breath, honestly. He's not going to be helping you compete. Utah is not a free agent destination. So what are they right now? They are a team that is probably the third worst team in the NBA right now. They might be the second worst team in the NBA. And they have a really, really talented player who makes a lot of money. Now, I have often believed in spotting market inefficiencies. I believed this when I was a teenager looking up, properties for sale in Toronto. I believed this when I was scavenging around looking for stocks that were oversold, after the 2008 recession. I did this again around COVID time. I'm an investor at heart. That's what I like to do. I like to think about this stuff. I like to think about what's getting undervalued, what's getting overvalued. Maybe if I think mid-range shooting is coming back, look at how the league is going right now, where physicality is back. Maybe strength matters more than it used to 2 years ago. Maybe that's a market inefficiency. I need to go for smaller, stronger players. I think this might be why the Raptors really, really wanted Colin Murray-Boyles in the draft, because boom, if the league is getting more physical, let's go get someone physical. I think, the 3-point shooting, like back in the day, 3-pointers were not necessarily as prevalent, but the teams that kind of spotted the trend invested in 3-point shooters like Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. Clearly, Jerry West saw the vision with these two players before anybody else did. Clearly, Steve Kerr saw the vision before anybody else did on this, and that's why they did it. They took what Mike D'Antoni had done in Phoenix and they amplified it. They took a lot of principles from D'Antoni. They took principles from Phil Jackson. They took principles from Larry Brown, George Karl. They took a lot of principles, and then they added great defense to it. So, all of that being said, actually, honestly, I can't even believe I didn't credit their biggest inspiration, which was the Spurs. So they took that, and they just imagined, well, what if the Spurs weren't anchored by the greatest power forward of all time, but rather the greatest point guard shooter of all time? And they just sort of flipped it. They didn't reinvent the wheel. They just spotted a trend. So here's a trend that I'm spotting. Your stats on a day-to-day basis, on a game-to-game basis, are a result of who you face and who you play with. You are one player of 9 players on the court. Here's something that I can say confidently for Lauri Markkanen. Lauri Markkanen's 4 teammates are on average worse than the average star player's 4 teammates. And not by a little, by a lot. This should make his numbers worse. I will also say, because the Utah Jazz are the worst team in the Western Conference by some considerable margin. Yes, they are way worse than Portland, San Antonio, New Orleans. They're the worst team. They will face 14 teams at a minimum of 3 times, where the average competition that he has to face is greater than the average competition that any star in the Western Conference will have to face. you see my point? This is just straight math, it's straight logical. It's very simple. The biggest disadvantage that Lauri Markkanen is at right now is that he doesn't get to face the Utah Jazz because he plays for the Utah Jazz. So the numbers that other team stars, like the numbers that Luka gets to put up against Utah because he has LeBron and he has Marcus Smart and he has DeAndre Ayton. Well, Lauri Markkanen doesn't have the benefit of killing Utah with teammates like Luka does. So because of the hefty price tag and because he plays in the stronger conference and because he plays on the worst team with the worst teammates and the youngest teammates in the strongest conference, I believe that Lauri Markkanen is hella underrated. I believe his stats are suppressed. You're talking about one of the most high quality shot takers in the league. Moving from the worst team in the West to, with him, probably a top 4 team in the East, which is the lesser conference. You can rehab this value so fast. And if he works out for you, then you're not only trading for a really good player, but you're also trading for a hell of an asset, because Lauri Markkanen unlocked in Toronto could be seen as the finishing piece on a championship puzzle, like the one they're trying to assemble in Cleveland, Orlando, New York, LA, whatever. You can take him on for a year, generate more stats, more value, more winning, and I think he'll be worth more a year from now. So what would it take? And why do the Utah Jazz want to trade him? Well, Utah Jazz, well, obviously I've mentioned they want to trade him because they want to be bad and because he's not on their timeline, because they have players who play his position. They keep drafting players who play his position. Kyle Filipowski, Taylor Hendricks, Ace Bailey. He might just ask out if he hasn't already. They're trying to develop him last year as a movement shooter, probably so that they can showcase him, because you don't develop first options as movement shooters typically, unless they're Steph Curry. You're developing him as a second or third option for somebody else. You're exhibiting him in the same way we exhibited Pascal Siakam before we traded him to Indiana. The same way we exhibited, OG Anunoby before we traded him to New York. You're trying to up his value by showing other teams this is how you might use him. The problem in Utah is he's having shots created for him by players who are not very talented at creating shots. There's a major gap in shot creation talent between Scottie Barnes, Brandon Ingram, RJ Barrett versus the players he's currently playing with. Now, obviously, he's not going to play with RJ Barrett, but that's at least from their side. What about the Raptors? Well, I think there's a reason why the Raptors might be reluctant to make a trade for Lauri Markkanen. One, dealing with Danny Ainge is no picnic. Number two, he's very expensive. $45-46 million a year, going all the way up to 49 for a defensive liability who hasn't played a lot of games in the last couple of years. This sounds very risky for a team that's already clipping the tax. But as they say, if you're going to be over the tax, be really over the tax. And Lauri Markkanen, any trade for Lauri Markkanen, other than, trading Emmanuel Quickley, is going to put you very comfortably over the tax line. You're going to have to commit to being a tax team. And I don't think the Raptors want to do that unless they think they have a real chance. So here's what needs to happen for Lauri Markkanen to become a Raptor, and for the Raptors to seriously consider pursuing this. And I'll give you a couple of trades that could make it happen. Around the trade deadline, and by the way, I think they would have wanted to trade for him last year. They probably would have made a pitch for him ahead of Brandon Ingram. The problem was Lauri was just signed to a new contract, so he couldn't be traded last year. So this year, let's say over the next couple of weeks, maybe at the trade deadline, I don't know. If the Raptors at the roughly around the trade deadline are north of 500, comfortably north of 500, and Scottie has really taken the progressive, the leap to superstar or borderline superstar, or where you can see the vision for superstardom, like you're like, this is our guy and our window is opening right now and Brandon Ingram is healthy, I think the Lauri Markkanen deal is a no-brainer. I think paying the tax is a no-brainer, because what we saw Indiana do last year, I'm not saying the Raptors can replicate what the Indiana Pacers did, because the Indiana Pacers did make it to the playoffs once before they had to topple everything over. But in the depleted East, you cannot ignore the possibility that this is your best chance to make the finals possibly for the next 3 years. Because once Jason Tatum comes back, who knows, right? Who knows? Or maybe this is more of a 2-3 year window thing. Maybe you project that Jason Tatum is not going to be that great when he comes back. Maybe he's just, maybe they're not going to be ever as dominant as they once were. And you're looking around at some of those other teams, you're like Charlotte, Washington. Do I really believe in what these teams are doing? I'm not sure. So you start to look around and you're like, man, do we have like a 2-3 year window to be like consistently in the conversation to make it to the finals? The Knicks aren't getting younger. Cat, Brunson, OG, Mikal, they're older than the Raptors. Way older, actually. It's really, you're looking at, you could even look at Donovan Mitchell over in Cleveland, right? Like he's approaching 30 real fast. Undersized guard approaching 30. He's their best player. So maybe Evan Mobley takes a step to becoming more of a prominent second option and a 22-point per game scorer, at which point, you have a real contender for the next few years, maybe Orlando. But apart from those two teams, who are you really scared of? Atlanta? Those are the three teams. Detroit? I think you can beat these teams. If the Raptors believe they can beat these three teams, Lauri Markkanen alongside Brandon Ingram, alongside Scottie Barnes, gives you a dynamic big three that make a lot of basketball sense. A lot of basketball sense. So I think that's the goal. Now, here's a trade that I think could work, but would require the Raptors to take on a lot of money. They're taking out $7 million more coming back. So they're going to be like $7.5 million over the tax line. The trade is RJ Barrett, Ochai Agbaji, and Gradey Dick for Lauri Markkanen. Some people think Lauri should be getting you multiple first round picks. I don't think so. I don't think this should be multiple first round picks. I think I'm either telling them take Gradey and, we obviously have to dump some salary here. We'd have to dump some salary here. But the problem here is if RJ gets extended north of 30 and Ochai gets extended north of 12, you're already paying the same salary for these three players. If Gradey gets extend it out. Let's say you extend RJ for 25. Let's be conservative and say he accepts 25. Let's say you extend Ochai for 12. You're at 37, right? And let's say you extend Gradey a couple years down the line for 15. And I think that 15 would be very cheap for Gradey. You're already north of $50 million for these three players. Why not just invest that money right now in a player who's better than all three of them? It's not like you can play 12 players. The Raptors have an abundance of depth. Unfortunately, they have a lot of parity between their players. Now, obviously, if Gradey is great, then maybe you have to move off of somebody else. Maybe you move off of Colin Murray-Boyles instead. And then the Utah Jazz add something else. This is a trade that might be a little too rich for some people, but this is more of an expanded idea. This results in the Raptors getting Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler, and Taylor Hendricks for RJ Barrett, Jakob Poeltl, Ochai Agbaji, Gradey Dick, and 2 first-round picks. I don't know if you do this, but I do know that this trade probably makes a lot of sense. Taylor Hendricks, former teammate of Scottie Barnes, really interesting player. I mean, we're talking way, way, way back in high school. So they're very familiar with each other. Walker Kessler is the type of rim protector that you really don't have on this roster. And obviously, Lauri can play the other minutes. Scottie can split some minutes behind him at the 5. So I think this makes you probably a better team. Right? I'm gonna be honest. The 2 first-round picks really hurt, but Taylor Hendricks, a lottery pick. Depending on how healthy you think he can be, I think he could be really good. These definitely aren't 3 of the best playmakers, and obviously, you're getting rid of 2.5 good playmakers for this. So maybe this isn't even something that fits with Darko's philosophy, but I'm just spitballing. Maybe it has to be a three team deal. My point really is that I think the Raptors should and will go and look at Lauri Markkanen if they are, at least in their mind, comfortably in the contention window. I'll check y'all later. Enjoy. Have a great day. And hit subscribe. Peace.